welcome to what is many firsts. The first time that One Jewish Evanston has been at JRC, which is great, and our first Rosh Chodesh program. I want to particularly welcome Rabbi Andrea London, as I'm sure Rabbi Weiss has and will again, the Rabbi of Evanston's other professionally led synagogue. I want to thank JRC for hosting us magnificently, specifically Rabbi Rachel Weiss, Cantor Howard Friedland, President Sandy Spatz, and Executive Director Sharon Diaz. I also want to thank the entire JRC staff, particularly Nina Litoff, for their help. And I also want to thank from Beth Emmet, my partner in many ways in One Jewish Evanston, Marcy Dickman, who couldn't be with us this morning but did a lot of work on this program. Just a few more thank yous if you bear with me. We run with a wonderful volunteer steering committee, so I just want to name everyone. Roberta Glick, Ray Grossman, Marla Baker, Sam Fleischacker, Rabbi Suzanne Griffel, Helene Rosenberg, Rabbi Michael Belinsky, who would be with us today but is at his second grandson's bris, so mazel tov to Michael, Ruth Wenger, Michael Simon, Rabbi Brandon Bernstein, Claire Sufrin, and Rabbi Alan Kensky. I also want to thank, although they may have been thanked separately, our service leaders in the main sanctuary, Carol Goldbaum from JRC, Linda Caskill from JRC, Paulette Herbstman from both Lomdim and JRC, and Nissan Shavkin from Beth Emmet. I think those are our leaders. Downstairs, Adina Goldman and Sam Fleischacker. For those who don't know, One Jewish Evanston is a consortium of 6 Evanston communities. Beth Emmet, the Free Synagogue, the Jewish Reconstructionist Congregation, the Lomdim Chavurah, Minyan Shirat HaAgam, the Evanston Orthodox Minyan, and Northwestern University Hillel, and its executive director, Michael Simon, is with us today as well. And together, these communities span the entire spectrum from Reform to Reconstructionist to Conservative to Orthodox, and include unaffiliated Jews as well. Speaking of One Jewish Evanston, our next event at Beth Emmet, it will be Saturday, January 6th. Please mark your calendars. That will be a full-day Shabbat program, many morning services, a good lunch, and afternoon learning, so stay tuned for more about that. And with that, I want to invite Sam Fleischacker up to the table, and he's going to, while he's getting mic'd, I'll just say, we want to, everyone here, speaking of important thank yous, should thank Sam and his wife, Amy Reichert, sitting next to him. They are sponsoring today's brunch in memory of Sam's mother, whose yahrzeit is today, and Sam's going to say, as soon as we get him set, a word or two about that.
So, thank you all very much for coming. My mother, Allah Shalom, Irma Fleischacker, grew up in Germany and had an exciting young rabbi who made all the kids very Orthodox, much to the dismay of their parents. And what's that? Did someone trying to get my attention? No. Okay. Oh. And as a child, she was very devout. The young rabbi was Rabbi Shimon Schwab, who went on to become quite famous in New York as the leader of the Breuer Yeshiva in Upper Manhattan. But partly due to the Nazi time and partly due to who she married, she became much less observant, I think not entirely happily. But she was the carrier of the Jewish tradition in our family. And we were sort of twice-a-year Jews, a little bit more than that. We would go on Saturdays, sometimes to shul. We didn't eat pork, we didn't eat shellfish. That was pretty strict for the world of Jews we knew, but we weren't regular daveners. I learned after a while that my mother quietly did prayers by herself before bed and had a little siddur that she kept, and none of us even knew about it. And my mother also didn't get much Jewish education, neither in the Orthodox world nor later on when we moved in different circles and she was no longer going to, there weren't adult classes in the places we were. So on the one hand, she was the one who encouraged us to keep up our Jewish commitment. On the other hand, I think that she didn't have as much of a commitment as she would have had in the more feminist world that we have today. And I say that because I think it's a special honor and especially wonderful to be able to sponsor an event in which Marcia Falk can be speaking today. I think she represents the kind of progress that the Jewish world has been making that I think my mother would have been very pleased about. My mother also would have been very pleased to sponsor something that involves Jewish learning. So I think this is a wonderful way to honor her.
Chodesh Tov, everyone. So one of the things that is remarkable about the work that I get to do here is that I serve the congregation in which I grew up. I was born in Evanston. I am a almost lifelong Evanstonian, except for my 13-year hiatus to the East Coast. But when I was born into this community of Evanston, and then later my Jewish education was through here, the Jewish Reconstructionist congregation, I had probably a pretty typical liberal education in which I learned how to read Hebrew, but I had no idea what it meant. Many of us may have had that experience, but I learned that the content of our rituals and prayers, liturgy, here in this congregation included Imahot, which in the 80s was a newer, more radical development, included everyone in an egalitarian way. When I decided to go to rabbinical school, I had to do 2 years of college Hebrew to prepare for that, and since I had been a Spanish major, I needed to do that at Oakton Community College in Skokie, in which I started to learn how to read Hebrew, the grammar, and what it meant. And I remember very distinctly sitting in high holidays, opening up a machzor, realizing that when I was singing the liturgy, I could translate it for myself and went, oh. All of my feminist and queer and socially progressive identities and ideologies went, what do I do with this? Because for me as a Reconstructionist, the ability, and we often say this here in this community, to bring our full intellectual selves, our rational selves, as well as our mystical and spiritual selves into the room at the same time is a hard thing to do, but is necessary. It requires a lot of wrestling. It can require a lot of gymnastics mentally with the liturgy and the words that we say because of masculine God language, a top-down hierarchical identity of this deity we call God. All of these different ways that are hard to wrestle with as a feminist, as someone who wants to be able to really pray the words that I mean, and to do it in the language of my ancestors, in the language of Siddur Hebrew. Fast forward, in the summer of 2002, exactly 3 floors below where we're standing now, which at that point was an outdoor garden, my soon-to-be, in those moments, wife, Julia, and I signed our ketubah at JRC, and we read this blessing to one another. Hayi asher tihi, v'hayi brucha ba'asher tihi, from Marcia Falk's Book of Blessings. Be who you are, and be blessed in all that you are. This is the blessing that was created as a blessing for all children. Not that they should be like particular patriarchs or matriarchs, but they should be who they are, understanding like asher yehiyeh, that I will be who I will be, the divine name, that we ourselves are in the process of becoming always who we are. That was from Marcia Falk's Book of Blessings, which in 1999 Julia gifted to me with the inscription that said, "May our home has as many blessings as this book does." It's hard to imagine how wonderfully radical language, prayer language, the Shema that Marcia led us in this morning could be. To take both the ideas and the concepts, the language that for many of us feels as comfortable as our own skin, and find ways to stretch and expand that to match the ideas and the ideologies that we have as 21st century Jews who live in a complex, multi-layered, multifaceted world. And so, It's my pleasure to be able to introduce this conversation between Dr. Marcia Falk and Rabbi Andrea London. Marcia Falk was born in New York City, raised on Long Island, and studied painting at the Art Students League as well as at the Jewish Theological Seminary, although I don't think JTS offered the painting part so much. Not the painting part. They still don't offer the painting part so much, maybe someday. She received a BA in philosophy, magna cum laude from Brandeis University, and a PhD in English and comparative literature from Stanford. She was a Fulbright Scholar in Bible and Hebrew literature at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and was a postdoctoral fellow as well. She was a university professor for 2 decades, teaching Hebrew and English literature, Jewish studies, Bible, and creative writing at Stanford, the State University of New York at Binghamton, and the Claremont Colleges. She is known for the Book of Blessings, The Days Between, which is a book of wonderful high holiday liturgy that many of us use at JRC with our supplemental readings on the Chagim, and her translation of the biblical Song of Songs into the Song of Songs, love lyrics from the Bible, as well as her book, The Spectacular Difference, the poems of Zelda, the well-known poet, Hebrew language poet that many of us know so well. She is the premier translator of Zelda's work, as well as the Yiddish modernist Malka Heifetz Tosman with Teeth in the Earth. She's a painter, continues to be exhibited not just as a liturgist, but as a painter, and currently lives in Berkeley, California. And we are thrilled to invite her to join us for a conversation which is cleverly titled, with thanks to the Kaplan Center for all that you do to organize One Jewish Evanston and to bring us all together. And with thanks to the Kaplan Center, read Dan Cederbaum's clever wit, Reconstructing, Reforming, and Conserving Our Liturgy. Yasher Koach. A conversation with Dr. Marcia Falk, Rabbi Andrea London, and all of us.
So I'm Colleen. Good afternoon. I'm so delighted and honored to be sitting here with Marcia Falk and having the privilege of interviewing her. Many of us in this room probably have the time in which we remember we first met Marcia Falk or her work, and I was so delighted that Rabbi Weiss spoke about the beautiful blessing that she and Julia gave to each other at their wedding, and there's so many of those stories that we have, and I'll share some of those as we go on in this interview, my memories. But I first want to start with asking Marcia about her Jewish background, her childhood, her education, and how, when, and why you began to write liturgy.
Well, you already know I'm a New Yorker. You don't know that I was born in the Bronx. Important to some of you here. I was raised in a conservative Jewish home with a very well-educated, Jewishly educated mother. Both my parents came from Orthodox homes, but my mother was particularly well-educated Jewishly, so I got some good background, and became a davener. My parents went to shul every Shabbos, Shabbat to some of us today, but and my father went every day to Minyan. And I was a regular davener, you know. I knew how to shuckle, I knew how to do the whole thing. I was sent to Camp Ramah. I studied at the Jewish Theological, Ramanic, that's where I learned my Hebrew mostly, I think. And I didn't start having difficulty with the Hebrew liturgy until many years later. And that happened in the 70s, early 70s, largely as a result of the feminist movement. I became a firebrand feminist in 1968. Major conversion, as some of us here I'm sure will have experienced. Biggest conversion in my life was from patriarchal thinking to, oh, there's a world out there where I'm not subsidiary, secondary. And, but it didn't hit me to really look at Jewish liturgy till a while after that, because Jewish feminists in the 70s were really concerned with where we sat in synagogue, whether we had aliyot, our participation in Jewish social organizations, but we weren't really looking at the theology. And it's easy to avoid the theology if you don't know Hebrew. But if you do, it becomes problematic at a certain point when you're praying from the Siddur. When you're praying from the Siddur, you start noticing that the being or entity or deity, as Rachel puts it, is quite patriarchal, a Lord, God, King of the world. And liturgy is not just reflective of the society, although it kind of was that, but it's also projecting into the society a world in which men, of course, were dominant. And the vision of the traditional liturgy, it wasn't just that all of the God language in the liturgy. Yeah, I know we have Shekhinah someplace in the background, but we weren't praying to Shekhinah. We were praying to the King, the Lord, the Commander, the Ruler. It wasn't just that was problematic. It was the whole picture. So I belong to a Shabbos minyan, a conservative one, and I used to go every week. And like I say, I was a davener, so I could, if I wanted to, race my way through the tefillot. But I got to the point where I couldn't really say those words anymore. So I would stand up there for the Amidah, the Shmoneh Esrei, and I would, in my head, translate or try to translate all the words, the Hebrew words, into something else. So instead of being among the first to sit down, I was like the last one to sit down because I was doing all this head work. And, you know, in a way, I've never thought of it this way, but it was sort of symbolic of how I felt at the time, which was pretty isolated. It still did not occur to me that I would rewrite any of the Siddur. How dare I, a Jewish woman, to take on the Siddur? But in 1983, I was at the Chavurah Institute. Do some of you know what that is? It's kind of a tech study camp for Jewish parents and, well, not just Jewish parents, excuse me, Jewish grown-ups and their kids. It was like a week-long summer camp. And I was teaching at this Chavurah Institute. And, oh, Shoshana Waskow, are you here in the room?
Yeah.
This is a story about your dad. Do you know this story? Probably. What's that?
I met you that summer. I think that's what was meant to
Say again?
I met you there also.
Yeah, okay. See, I met some of you then. But this story, I don't know if you know this, Shoshana, you might. Shoshana's father, Rabbi, who wasn't rabbi at the time, but was still a big macher in the movement, Art Waskow, was leading the Havdalah service that Saturday night. He was he was leading the service, and he approached me on Friday morning and asked me if I would write kavanot, meditations, little introductions to each of the 4 blessings that are said in the Havdalah service that ends Shabbat and starts the week. And without thinking, and I had never said this before in my life, I'd never said this publicly, I said no. And he said, what do you mean no? Because I never said no to that sort of thing. I said, I can't say those blessings. He said, you can't say those blessings? And I said, no. He said, and only your father would have had the nerve to say this at the time. I certainly didn't. He said, so write your own blessings. You got to understand, this is for Shoshana's benefit, he was a big guy with a powerful presence and a lot of self-confidence, none of which were my characteristics. But I went home that Friday afternoon and I put my pen to where my head had been for the previous couple of years, I guess, and I wrote my first blessings. But I had said to Art, I can't do this, they'll stone me. I really was quite nervous about it. And he said, oh, Marcia, that's just what he would have said, right? Oh, Marcia, they won't stone you, just do it. So I got up Saturday night in front of this, I don't know how many people are at the Institute, a couple hundred, and it was a mixed group, kind of like all of you today. Orthodox, conservative, reform, and I imagine there were some recons there at the time. I'm sure there were some New Agers, whatever. Secular Jews too, it was a study camp. I got up in front of this whole community, and when it was time for Havdalah, I said these blessings. And you know what? No one stoned me. I'm not sure how much they noticed because it was so unexpected. But they started to notice the following year, and I'll stop here. That was the start of the whole process. I never intended then or subsequently to write a Siddur. I was just writing a few blessings for the Havdalah service.
The Book of Blessings, which has just been released in the 20th anniversary edition, even though it's really the 21st anniversary here, because it was 1996, was just released by the CCAR Press. What year did you begin writing the Book of Blessings, and how long did it take you to write it?
So if you count those first blessings, that was 1982. And then in 1980, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. It was 1983, I think, that this happened. Who keeps track anymore? You get to a certain age and the numbers all blend. So that was 1983, and in 1984 there was a conference called Illuminating the Unwritten Scrolls, Jewish Women's Spirituality and Jewish Tradition. And I was asked to give the keynote talk on liturgy, feminist liturgy, and I wrote a new Kiddush and Shechianu for that conference. And I got up there and did it, and this time I did get a reaction, and it was a nice reaction. It was a standing ovation to my amazement. And shortly after that, Moment magazine asked me to write it up as an essay. And I did. And they got a lot of letters to the editor, and now they weren't all so positive. Now they were half fan mail and half, what shall I say, almost hate mail. It was the how dare you response. And I was attacked in some pretty intense ways. But at the same time, the word got out that I was doing this. And so I started writing a little bit more, and they were circulating. The blessings were circulating on mimeographs. You remember mimeographs? Showing my age again. And again, I still didn't intend to write a big fat book like this. I was gonna write a slender volume, like poets write. But one thing led to another, and 13 years later, the book was published. So from 83 to 96.
So you've spoken a little bit about your feminist awakening that had an impact on how you saw the liturgy and why you wanted to rewrite the liturgy. Is there any other theology that you're trying to portray in your blessings, and anything that was going on in the social climate in addition to feminism that had an influence on your writing and on your theology and your thinking?
Well, excuse me, feminism led to a lot of things. So when you start looking at patriarchy, you can't help but rethink hierarchy in general, right? I mean, we've got male, female. What else have we got? And what else does it model in the society? So that was, it wasn't immediately obvious to me, but pretty soon after, I knew that I could have no kind of anthropomorphic divine in my blessings. Not even alternating, none of this, I don't know, Adonai versus Shekhinah didn't work for me because I couldn't accept the hierarchy of the great chain of being, and I felt that referring to the divine as a human being, now granted it's a metaphor, I understand that, but our metaphors are important. There are images that make an impact. I couldn't use anthropomorphic language. So that was, and then slowly, it was Rabbi Ira Eisenstein and his wife Judith, who was the daughter of Mordechai Kaplan, who I met back in those years, and they said to me, you're really a Reconstructionist. And the honest truth, I hadn't thought of myself that way. I really thought of myself kind of non-denominationally, a kind of, the most important thing to me was the vision of a non-hierarchical vision expressed in poetic language, in Hebrew as well as English, because I wanted to very much preserve and confront at the same time the necessity for preserving the vitality of our long chain of civilization, without which without Hebrew, Jewish civilization cannot survive, and I believe that to this day. And I think Kaplan believed that too. That made me go back and read Kaplan. And Kaplan does not totally express my theology, but I would say of any movement, I related most to Kaplan. But as many of you know, Reconstructionism has moved away from Kaplanian theology. I won't go into that now. I think ultimately, I came to a sense of divine immanence, no out there, no transcendence, but another sense of the greater whole of all of us. The greater whole. That is, it's not about me, myself. I was accused at one point, and one of my many accusers said, it's very selfish. He doesn't want to talk to God. No, it wasn't really that. It was me as part of a greater whole. And that's how I actually came up with Nivarech, let us bless. It also happened to be gender inclusive, which was very convenient. That was my first blessings. I thought, how am I going to deal with Baruch Atah? I didn't want Bucha'at, because like I say, I didn't relate to either of those sort of personifications, but Nivarech, let us all bless, Hebrew, imperfect or future, gender inclusive. So,
you've said that non-theists have told you that your blessings speak to them. What kind of feedback have you received over the years as to whom your blessings speak and to whom they don't?
Mostly the people for whom they don't speak don't get in touch with me. And that's fine. I don't intend for them to speak for everyone. People who I always say, have it your way. You don't like this book, that's fine. Not every book is for everyone. So just leave it alone. If the traditional siddur works for you, bevakasha, please continue to use it. I'm trying to create something for those of us who find the traditional siddur problematic in one way or another. And the people who have gotten back to me have, in a positive way, have ranged from actually some modern Orthodox even who use it as a sort of supplement or as kavanot. Or I talked this morning about the Shema and how I was trying to elicit from the Shema more meaning. So there are modern Orthodox friends of mine who use it as kind of how it was used today, side by side. But mostly the people who get back to me are the people who use it as some kind of alternative in whole or in part for the traditional liturgy, and that includes the span of progressive or liberal Judaism in here and now in Israel too, and many secular Jews who have told me that for the first time they feel they have something that they can use for Shabbat, for holidays, for personal prayer. So that's been super gratifying. It's been the main gratification I've gotten, because if there are any authors in the crowd who have written anything other than popular romances, you don't make money from writing books. So you got to get your gratification elsewhere. And for me, it's all about the response from people like you. It's very meaningful to me.
Marcia, the first time that I heard you speak about the Book of Blessings was at the Women's Rabbinic Network Conference in Minneapolis in 1999. Women's Rabbinic Network is the network for Reform women rabbis, and we have a conference every other year. And in 1999, I was serving a congregation in Minneapolis, Temple Israel there, and you came up to that conference. And Debbie Friedman was actually also at that conference. She was leading music and you were leading liturgy. It felt like a very powerful women's moment to have the two of you, considering the fact that you have been really the leader when it comes to writing new and feminist liturgy and non-anthropomorphic liturgy, as you said, and Debbie Friedman with her music. I remember just the feeling of having the two of you in the room and leading us in worship. You had us pray out of the book at the conference. And you told us that this is how you wanted the book to be used. Although many people there love your work and have been working to incorporate more non-hierarchical liturgy into their community's prayer experiences, people were surprised that you thought that the Book of Blessings was be a standalone siddur, and this was a group of 100 women. In the 20 years since its publication, have there been communities that have adopted this as their siddur? If a community is not going to adopt it as a siddur, what would you suggest is the most effective way to use your blessings?
Is Rachel still here? She left, and she had to get into the mother role right now. But she was rabbi for Beit Simchat Torah, which was the, I don't know how they define it, gay welcoming or gay synagogue in New York. Before her, it was, I believe, Sharon Kleinbaum.
Sharon's still there.
Oh, she's still
senior,
there.
yeah.
Okay, she's senior now. And some other people who actually, there were some reconstructionists there, Sandy Warshawski, who started a group that I think it was something like once a month they would use the Book of Blessings for their Shabbat services. And I've experienced that in a smattering of other congregations across the country. But I have to say that, I'm surprised that the women rabbis were surprised and didn't tell me so. Could have had an interesting conversation at the time. It would have been helpful feedback for me. And over the years, though, as I've seen how the Book of Blessings has wended its way throughout the American Jewish landscape, I realized that some of what I did not want for the book I'm now seeing as, it's like you write a folk song and then the folk take it over and what are you going to do? So my my motto is always, have it your way. However you want to use the book is fine with me. You want to use it as a commentary? Fine. You want to use it as a substitute? Fine. You want to do the whole service? That means a lot to me, and I'll tell you why. In my conception of it, it's a kind of oratorio or a cantata, or it's a whole. It's an aesthetic whole. And one thing I don't like so much is a little piece from here, a little piece from there, and it all kind of smushed together, because then I feel like you don't have a coherent theology at all. So it's not that I want to just replace the Siddur with mine, but I would like the Book of Blessings to have a chance to be used in its wholeness at least some of the time. And I can't really control that people are snatching it here and there, including the new Reform Siddur, the new Conservative Siddur, the millions of little synagogue, but to my shock, the Conservative Machzor has my Shema in it. That was shocking. So, I mean, they put it in the margins, of course, but still. So, geh gesundheit. Have it your way.
I love what you just said, that you see it as a cantata, and it made me think that one of the issues with the book is that only some of the liturgy has there been music that has been set to music. Wonderful if somebody would really create it as a cantata, so that it could be a whole piece of liturgy that people could then, follow along and pray. I think that certainly one of the challenges people have is that the words are new, and when we come into prayer, and all of a sudden you're not familiar with that Hebrew.
I have a few answers to that. The last answer first is that the new becomes old and traditional after it's in use a few times. You learn a new melody, first time it's strange, second time it's, I kind of get it even though I get some of the notes wrong. By the third time, it's the tradition. So let's not be so afraid of... Now, some of my blessings I actually wrote to go to the traditional melodies. Aleinu l'shabeach lifat tever, lifol v'lamol letikun olam, ki b'tochen... Okay, you got the idea. I had a conversation with Judith Eisenstein, again, Mordechai Kaplan's daughter, Rabbi Ira Eisenstein's wife, but more importantly, as her own person, a musicologist, a musician, and a composer. And I showed her some of the some of the music that was being written for my stuff, and we were thinking at that time of putting some of it in the book. She said, don't put any of this in the book. First of all, the words should stand alone and not be constricted by any particular melody. But she thought that what should happen was the whole book should be put into nusach. So the way we have the sort of traditional different chanting styles we have for Shabbos, for the Chagim, for the Yamim Noraim. And she offered to do it. Alas, she died before she had the chance to do it. Great loss to me. A loss to me anyway, because she was a dear friend, but great loss to me. Music, not music. The way I feel about poetry is it really doesn't always need music. Sometimes you sing along these nice little songs and you're not paying attention anymore to the words. And kind of that's part of my project, is to get us to pay attention to the words. So some of you have heard me kind of read over this weekend. And hopefully, there's enough music in our voices that when we just say the words, especially hearing the line breaks, that's a little meditation I did the other night, it doesn't always need music.
Do you think the Book of Blessings started a new movement in American Jewish liturgical life? and more recently in Israeli Judaism. What has changed in Jewish attitude toward prayer, gender, and hierarchy over the past 2 decades? How have your own attitudes and theology changed over this period of time?
Just that?
Just that.
So I used to say to the first part of the question, I don't know, I'm not a sociologist. I'm a poet. And then I started saying, you are the rabbi, you tell me. But in the new edition of the Book of Blessings, there are 3 essays at the back, new essays by 4 Reform rabbis, 2 of whom are in Israel. So they're specifically about what's changed in the landscape and how the Book of Blessings has effected that change. So I'll leave it to those rabbis to answer the question. There was a kind of second or third or fourth part of that question that you... and I think I answered the part about how my own theology has evolved.
Well, what has changed in Jewish attitudes towards prayer, gender, and hierarchy over the past 2 decades?
Well, I mean, you know that answer even better than I do, because again, I'm not a sociologist, and the rabbis who wrote in the back of the book spoke about that. So read that. And I think you know for yourselves, if you're old enough, maybe those of you who are millennials or around that age don't realize how gendered everything was. But we're seeing now, an explosion of different experiments. Mm-hmm. So I think, yes, there's been some enormous change. But we have a long way to go, a really long way to go.
In the preface to your latest edition, you have an essay about the black letters on the white space. And you write, in prayer, as in poetry, there is an interplay between sound and silence. One does not exist without the other. How does silence function in your blessings?
Well, again, I'm a poet, and so what makes something a poem as opposed to prose? It's the line breaks. It's not metaphor, it's not nuance, it's not tone, because prose can have all of that. A good prose writer has all of that. Metaphor, the whole shtick. But prose doesn't have line breaks. Poetry does. And what does a line break signal? It signals pause. Stop speaking, even for an instant. Let a bit of silence in. Now, I think what that does is that it draws us in to the text if it's a poem. And if it's prayer, and I believe that not all poetry is prayer, of course, but I believe that all prayer, verbal prayer, should be some form of poetry. There should be white space to allow ourselves into it. And as I say in this essay, the black ink directs the heart. I don't know if that's how I say it, but anyway, something like that. And the white space is to let our own hearts speak, to let it in.
So this morning, and Friday night when you were at Beth Emet, you read for us your Shema and Ve'ahavta. You've said in other places that you think that the Tanakh should stand as it is and the prayer should change. But these pieces which come from Tanakh are pieces that you rewrote. So I wanted you just, for those people who have not yet heard you read the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, I think that they're very powerful pieces. And why did you make that choice to actually change words from the Tanakh?
I do not change a single word of Tanakh in Tanakh, okay? When I read from Tanakh or Talmud or any of our foundational texts, they are what they are. They're our foundational texts. They're a record of our history, where we've come from. They're our literature. I don't touch them. We study them, we read them, but the difference between them and liturgy, 2 main differences. Liturgy is always changing. Tanakh doesn't change. You can write about it, you can comment, You can even reject parts of it if you don't like it, but it doesn't change. Liturgy changes. It evolves over the years. But the main point is that when I read Tanakh, again, I'm reading a historical document which has accompanied us through the millennia. When I say prayer, I want to speak honestly about what I believe. Now, I use a lot of phrases and themes and motifs from traditional sources. Sometimes I adapt them. Sometimes, like the closing of my Shema is a pasuk from Tanakh that's my favorite of all pasukim. But again, I'm not changing the Hebrew Bible. I am changing or adapting or whatever you want to call it, our prayer. Is that distinction clear? Because sometimes it's misunderstood. People think I'm ready to change everything in tradition. On the contrary, I consider myself a traditionalist. Part of a long stream of people who have taken the tradition and kept it moving. As I think Mordechai Kaplan would agree, Judaism as a civilization. So some of you have heard this from me once already, some twice. Some of you will have it memorized by the time the weekend's over, but some of you haven't heard it before. So what I ask that you listen for is, I feel like I have not so much eliminated or changed as, in my language, given some interpretation or meaning to the traditional word. So here we go. Shema Yisrael la'elohut alfei panim melo olam shechinata ribui paneha echad. נאהב את החיים ואת אין החיים בכל לבבנו ובכל נפשנו ובכל מאודנו. ויהיו הדברים האלה בלבבנו ובקרבנו, שמירת ארץ ויושביה, רדיפת צדק ושלום, אהבת חסד ורחמים. נשננם לבנותינו ולבנינו, ונדבר בם בשבתנו בביתנו, בלכתנו בדרך, בשוכבנו ובקומנו. ויהיו מעשינו נאמנים לדברנו, למען ידעו דור אחרון, בנות ובנים ייוולדו, חסד ואמת נפגשו, צדק ושלום נשקו. Hear, O Israel, the divine abounds everywhere and dwells in everything. The many are one. Loving life and its mysterious source with all our heart and all our spirit, all our senses and strength, we take upon ourselves and into ourselves these promises: to care for the earth and those who live upon it, to pursue justice and peace, to love kindness and compassion. We will teach this to our children throughout the passage of the day as we dwell in our homes and as we go on our journeys from the time we rise until we fall asleep. And may our actions be faithful to our words, that our children's children may live to know truth and kindness have embraced, peace and justice have kissed and are one.
Amen. So we're going to open the floor now for some questions, and we'll bring the microphone around.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wanted to just see how you react to a little pushback. You mentioned that the Tanakh and the Talmud in these texts are a record of our history that binds together generations. but then that is different than liturgy. But I think one could argue that liturgy has served that kind of, although it evolves, serves that kind of role too. I can open up something like the Mass or Victory, like something from medieval Ashkenaz, and recognize that liturgy is largely the same as what I see in Shul and Shabbat, right? Even though it's evolved. And this has helped Jews connect to other generations and people in other places. And even the Shema that you just so beautifully read, listening to it, I hear echoes of the traditional text. So this was a long introduction to the following question: how do you think a reconstructed liturgy like yours, say in a community once it's been adopted and used in the way you envision it being used as a whole, say a generation in the future where people in their heads they have the Reformed liturgy and not the traditional liturgy? I think the experience of the reconstructed liturgy is going to be different, right? And will it still be as effective? Because, like, I can hear your Shema and relate it to the Shema of my ancestors because I hear the words. But if I've grown up with the new one, then...
Let me push back a little to you and ask you, how effective do you think the traditional liturgy is today for the majority of, say, American Jews? How effective do you think it will be in the next generation? I very much see my purpose as trying to keep alive our tradition by revisioning what's behind it so that we can speak more honestly. I have heard, yes, I understand exactly what you're saying. I get a question, perhaps not put so elegantly and with such erudition as you put it, but I've heard that question at practically every talk I give, so I understand the desire for the connection to the past, the desire for the connection around the globe, although it really isn't quite like that. There's much more variation than we tend to think of. But everything in our culture changes, except we've ossified, the liturgy has ossified in the past century and a half, and it's no longer speaking for the majority of Jews. Maybe this is a Hail Mary path to see if we can have it speak more. I can't answer the objection so much as to pose an alternative way of thinking about what tradition will mean in the future. But I thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Especially the Machzor Vitrin.
Thank you, Dr. Falk. It's been an extraordinary morning. I have a question for you as a poet. Not myself, but you as a poet. In the creative process, how did the different strands of theology, the Hebrew text, the actual... I'm thinking of the story you told about when you would daven and imagine it in your head, and how you would be the last person to sit down because you were engaged in this dialogue. And I wonder when you started to write and through all the years and now, which comes first, or how did the third strand I would mention would be the English, which is the avenue or doorway for many of us. How do you make the three, the theology, the Hebrew language, and your own English creation work together? How did this work?
Yeah, good question. So, first of all, what I was doing when I was standing up there translating my head has nothing to do with the way I write poetry, okay? I was just struggling with the text. As for the Hebrew and the English, I often started with the Hebrew because I was working off of the traditional text. And what I would do, that's why it took 13 years, I would sit and just sit with it and see what could I draw, what meaning could I draw out of these words, some of which are beautiful, some of which I've just plunked in the book, like that last line from my Shema, peace and justice, that one. But mostly I would sit with it and then go away from it entirely. because I have never been able to write a poem on command. Never. This, would you write a poem for my birthday? Forget about it. I'll sing to you, happy birthday. So it was this back and forth process. Now the theology was just something that came naturally. I mean, there was no, I didn't think about that. It just was there. I was suffused with it. As for the English came out of a different stream. My doctorate's in English literature, so I have this whole, English literary tradition out of which I draw. And my Hebrew and English in the Book of Blessings are not translations of each other. There are, in the back, there's a big commentary at the Book of Blessings in the back where you can find an exact literal translation of my Hebrew, and I deliberately put it there for people who don't know Hebrew. But I have the two languages going almost as, what's the word, I don't know, but, trying to give you two streams, two strands. My Sfat Em, English, and my Sfat Dam, my mother tongue, and the tongue of my blood, which is Hebrew. Does that answer enough of your question? It was a big question. So.
What I found most intriguing about your book of Blessings, and I think you alluded to this in the introduction, but I think the act, was that it was a book you took home to read at home. It was a book of poems. It wasn't a secular. It was a book of blessings. And one of the things that every once in a while, I don't read it often, some occasion, I'll go to that book at home. And that doesn't have to do with any service necessarily. And that's what I find inspiring. In other words, a lot of people don't go to synagogue very often. And so this book is in a way, for me, a reminder that one can sit at home and read a prayer as a poem and enjoy it and still connect also with the tradition. So I thought it was very special, always has been. And I wonder if you had that in mind in the sense when you wrote it.
Yeah, there are definitely sections in the Book of Blessings, and perhaps even more so in the new book, The Days Between, which is a very meditative book, focuses on the themes of the High Holiday, which are awesome days of awe and have a lot to do with mortality. And there is a lot of stuff in there that really is for the individual. There's also a lot of stuff for synagogue and communal experience. And you can draw from wherever and use it at home. I think I say someplace that I could imagine it being used in the kitchen or in shul, on a park bench. And once again, have it your way. However you get something from it touches me.
Hi, I'm Adina. I'm a senior at Northwestern. As I was reading your Shema, one thing that struck me about just the sort of the grammatical formulation of what you chose to do was that it removes the language of obligation from the Shema, for instance, and from other poetic languages. In the Hebrew, ve'ahavta, you shall love, is typically, not always, but typically read as commanding language. And this is nohav, we shall love.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if...
Or let us love, the exhortative.
Was that a factor in your decision to
definitely.
The obligation?
Yeah, definitely. Because I have a lot of trouble with the idea of external commander, right? It does not fit with my theology. However, I do have a sense of absolute, morality. I don't think that anything is okay. But where do we find that sense? And for me, I find it internally and within the human community. I call it conscience. I call it educated morality. I call it civilization. Okay. So what I do is I take commandment and I turn it into taking upon ourselves and into ourselves these promises. And then I articulate them. And I do believe that in a traditional sense, these are what we're commanded These are very Jewish values. And for those of us who really don't visualize an external commander, these are things we have to search for within our very human sense of conscience and morality.
Thank you for being here. It means a lot to me and a lot of us.
Thank you.
Question, to switch gears a little bit. I've heard of Zelda, the Yiddish poet.
Yeah.
So could you just say for a minute or two why you chose to translate her work? I mean, the fact that it hadn't been is probably why, but...
The fact that what, did you say?
You translated her work?
Yes, but what was... Oh, yeah.
What spoke to you from her writing?
Well, she's an ultra-Orthodox, comes from a long line of Hasidic rabbis, and originally, I was asked to translate a couple of her poems for this Israeli magazine called Ariel. That was my introduction to her. But then I went to meet her. I was living in Jerusalem. Don't look so shocked. She was open to the entire world. She was a very observant, of course, Hasidic woman, but her friends spanned the whole spectrum of the Jewish world in Israel, and that included secular Jews. The soldiers would take her in their backpacks to the fronts. There was something magical about her. It was just magical. And I fell in love with her personally. I'll tell you a funny story about Zelda. I would often spend, not often, but occasionally spend Shabbos with her, either for lunch or Shabbos dinner. And during the week, I would sometimes just show up as a, guest at her home. I showed up one day. It was a heat wave. It was a really terrible heat wave, and I had a kerchief around my head to protect against the sun, and I was wearing shorts. I show up at Zelda's home, and this modestly dressed woman says to me, Marcia, יש לך ראש דתי וגוף חילוני. You've got a religious head and a secular body. That was Zelda. Anyway, her theology is obviously not mine, but I love her. And in my book, The Spectacular Difference, which I hope you'll all look up because it's really an introduction to this wonderful poet. I talk in the introduction of how I came to know her and how I understand her poetry.
So I want to thank you. And it occurs to me, we've sponsored this in honor of my mother, but what you've done, I think, will speak very much to our daughter. You told us at one point, we were raised in a fairly traditional home, Shomer Shabbat, and we davened all about Siddur, and she said, I've gone through the Siddur, and I cannot find a single line that I can say.
Your daughter said that.
I think she said one thing. The meditation after the Amida was the only thing she thought she could say. I tried to find some other thing, and she said she began to cry actually as well. So I think we will get her equal.
Oh, please, yes. See, that's what I mean. There are people who feel so excluded. This brings them into the fold or allows them to stay, I hope. How old is your daughter?
Well, she said that to us about 10 years ago when
She's 25.
16 or so. She's now older, but I think she'll still find it very useful.
I hope so. I hope she didn't outgrow it.
And our son at some point told me when he was a teenager, I don't believe in a God who wants us to pray to him. Now, I remain somebody who believes in a God I can pray to, and it's in that spirit that I want to ask this question. And I didn't ask it as a challenge, but out of puzzlement. I'm a philosophy professor. You're a philosophy undergraduate. You won't be surprised probably to hear that I hear a lot of Spinoza in theology. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand why a Spinozist would pray.
Why Spinoza what?
Why a Spinozist would pray.
Okay.
Why do you want to pray?
I wish you had been there Friday night because I talked about this at length. Was it Friday night or Saturday morning? You know what? Because I know we don't have a lot of time, So if you get the second edition of my book for your daughter, the preface, I wrote a second preface. It has 4 meditations. One of them is, why would a non-theist, by non-theist I mean, you know, someone who doesn't believe in a transcendent other, pray? And it tells you why I do. And I mean the book to be for theists and non-theists alike. I hope, as I do for all my poetry, that it's open enough to embrace. But the answer to that question is exactly addressed, because I addressed the 4 questions I addressed in that preface were the questions I've been asked over the years. So that's one of them.
So in just a moment, Sam will, speaking of prayer, lead us to their conference. So first, I want to thank Marcia, Falk, and Rabbi Giovanni.
Thank you. Thank you.
Books will be for sale here in New York.